Hi, Misha here. Those who kind of follow my personal channel know that back in the late winter of 2024, I picked up a reasonable sized collection of little pocket pistols, vest pockets, mostly 25s, some 22s, a few other oddballs. And because it's me, we started with the Carl Walther Model 9. Neat little gun, fun story there. And we have many we'll be covering over the year. I know this is a very niche market, so I don't want to overwhelm people, but there are some really neat ones I'm excited to get to from France and, of course, from the UK. But today, well, we have a gun that's more interesting for its story than its actual substance. The South African Junior Pretoria Arms Factory, PAF. This is a little 6.35 25 caliber. And at first it might look like a copy of a baby Browning, and it is. But it also takes elements from a lot of other pistols besides, and maybe has one or two elements on its own. And this is not the first South African gun we've looked at on the channel either. Probably the most famous gun from the Republic of South Africa, sometimes the Union of South Africa, is the Vector CP1. And I don't have one today, but back in the past, when a few surplus examples ran, we not only reviewed one, we even shot it. Should have added pew-pew sounds to the video back then, though. Kind of unique little gun. This is the South African Vector, V-E-K-T-O-R, which is today Littleton, CP1.
Go ahead.
That was an interesting gun, the CP1. Probably more so than the little Junior. But the Junior is important because it was the first. But of course, the most important, and the one I've kept over the years, is my South African Vector, later Littleton Engineering, Machining, LM5. This was South Africa's copy of the Galil. Specifically, the LM5 is the semi-automatic only version of the R5, which the R5 is a take on the Israeli IMI Galil SAR, the carbine length gun with a 13-inch barrel. Of course, they also did the R4, which was a South African version of the Galil ARM. And there was a semi-automatic LM4, but very few of these are in the U.S. as they came over as samples. And then South Africa was sanctioned, embargoed later on in that year, 1985, by the Reagan administration, so it never took off as planned. But our PAF Junior, this story actually goes back to World War II. And whereas the Galils were meant for the military, with some being sold to, say, civilian farmers, this was pretty much a civilian commercial offering, and frankly, it shows. The Pretoria Arms Factory, PAF, was established around 1954 in South Africa by a couple of Dutch immigrants, and this was their first offering. Interesting. Sort of. But more for what it is, like I said. Mechanically, it kind of just borrows here and there. In general terms and layout, it's much like, say, a Browning say, FN 1906, a Colt 1908, but no grip safety. And here's the FN 1906, or at least a derivation of, and a Colt 1908. Remember that John Moses Browning was the inventor of both. FN Herstal in Europe and Colt in America were his, manufacturers, marketers, what have you. Standard little guns. Inspired a lot, including the Junior. Fun fact, there's also a Colt pistol in 25-22 called the Junior as well. So simplified there. Like I said, 6.35, 25 caliber. As far as I know, that was the only chambering ever sold. I think they were going to do a 7.65, 32, but it never got past the tool room testing prototypes phase. Pretty standard mag. I think it's 8-round capacity. Picking it up, though, it's very light steel, which gets into manufacturing. We'll get to in a minute. But the insides are a little different. The trigger makeup, the transfer bar, is really more like a Beretta, say a 1934, 35. And the 34, 35s actually inherited their system from earlier versions, beginning with the 1915, running through the 1919. And, yeah, like I said, not a fantastic. It's not identical to the South African, but just try to show some comparisons. We will definitely feature this old gun. I love how worn and beat up it is. Part of that whole family. I love metal grips. And so the trigger is not great. You've got a safety back here. And I've noticed with this, you really have to pull it back far to charge it. And pulling the trigger, at least on this example, the little internal, it's not hitting with a great deal of force. I mean, it works, but a lot of guns you don't have to charge back all the way, but you have to get a thing on it. It does disassemble, much like FN Browning designs. You just pull it back here. You can notice the serrations on the barrel, like a Ruby pistol, any of those. You just simply rotate it. There's a new notch right there. And then you see a locking lug. I am not going to fully disassemble it because getting the springs all lined up is kind of a bear. You can see there is a guide rod under there. I just wanted to mention that. What's interesting, though, instead of having a couple of locking recesses for the slide frame barrel, it only has one big one. And that's more like some offerings from CZ. For example, the CZ45. Here are the FN and the Colt partially put in the disassembly. Again, I don't want to go to a lot of trouble, but you can see there's essentially one large lug with a couple of relief cuts for serrations, just to give more of a surface, a little more elegant. But of course, also more machining. And here is the CZ offering, which, okay, it's different in the hammer, but the disassembly at first seems to be the same. But once you get into it, you notice that, for one thing, it doesn't have the grasping grooves in the front the same. And then you start to rotate the barrel, and it's like the South African. And here it is, mostly rotated out. Just one large lug with no relief. And we will definitely focus on these guns and the Beretta we looked at earlier in their own separate videos. I just wanted to do a little comparison with the Praetorian Arms. So, yeah, a little bit of Beretta, a little bit of CZ, quite a bit of John Browning, some, FN stuff too, a little Colt, I'm trying to think if there's anything truly unique or innovative about this design. If so, it's small and inconsequential. By the way, as you saw, no last round hold open, but that's pretty common. The safety doesn't act as a slide hold open for disassembly like a lot of other pocket guns of the era. Instead, you just have to hold it back with your hand. And the spring isn't too tough, but yeah, the trigger really is crummy on this thing. And that's the mag rattling. Pop it out again just to see. It's a standard mag catch. See, it's actually quite tight when that's out. But again, it's a very thin mag. So let's get into quality and manufacturing. And here are the mags out of the FN and the Colt. The FN mag is definitely weightier than the PAF. Yeah, the Colt is too. First I thought it felt a little lighter, but no. These are both heavier and they're lower capacity. So that should tell you something. So we have plastic or hard rubber. Seem more like plastic, but back in the 50s it's hard to tell. Grip panels. Neat logos on them. These are actually in better shape than most because they've all shrunk over time. I had a French MAB. I think it was a D. Maybe it was a C. I know, time goes by. Oh my goodness, the grip panels had really shrunk on it where the pins, the holes absolutely didn't line up. Pretty much all of these are going to be cracked unless they're replacement grips, and there have been replacement grips made. Neat markings on the slide, but mostly just for what it is. This was very much a first effort, and it shows. There are claims, and there seems to be some validity to them, of less than ideal metallurgy and or improper heat treatment. The thing about heat treatment, it's a balancing act. You don't want too soft, but you don't want over hard, which leads to brittleness. Ask Springfield and Rock Island in World War I how well that worked out. So there have been issues with parts in the back breaking from recoil. There's also issues with the slide separating from the frame because the first pattern, the locking lug was actually too big. It did not leave enough meat, and it was too narrow there, and the area where it locked in would get stressed out. So they actually shrunk the barrel lug a little bit into production. They also went from kind of somewhat raised sights to a very simple sighting groove with what we can call the second pattern. And hopefully they did tighten up metallurgy a little bit. This is obviously a later style. And there is a different marking that appears on some of these. Some grips, and even some grips and some slides, instead of having PAF, will have BRF. It's speculated that after maybe some initial teething issues, the Portrayed Arms Factory getting a less than great reputation, this rebranding was done to kind of distance the Junior. It was also speculated that it stood for whatever company was marketing it in the US, Europe, what have you. But it actually just seems to stand for, some guy's initials. And I'm not good with names and pronunciations like that. For that, check out Forgotten Weapons. Ian is definitely better at that kind of thing than I am, for sure. Then again, he actually gets paid for this stuff, so there's that. And there's not much out there on these. There's not a wiki page. The only other substantive information, kind of like with the Walther video, is from Unblinking Eye, Ed Buffalo, who's kind of the go-to for early 25s and 32s in the first place. And even he is oft repeating the few little bits of info he's gleaned over the years. And even though Forgotten Weapons states that a lot of these were made, it actually doesn't seem so. It seems like production was only 10, 12,000. And it seems like primary production was only from like 54 through 57, 58. I couldn't find a very, very firm end date because these would be on the market for much longer, into the 70s in some instances, because they didn't sell fantastic. Again, they weren't really special, and they were competing with a lot of things. It was a new factory. But either way, in the grand scheme, even though several might be in America, I don't think 10,000 or a little more worldwide made 60 years ago is especially huge. But it was the first gun made in South Africa, and it was technically its own design. They didn't just straight up copy one other design. They didn't do like Spain did with the Ruby. Even it was simplified, though, from the original Browning. They did homage several others and kind of copy what they thought were the best features or the features that they could easily produce. Because, again, they're starting from scratch. And I know in Forgotten Weapons he said that this was, one of the very first, if not the first, gun made in the whole southern part of Africa, and I could believe it. And it wasn't really done with direct assistance from any European company or country. They had their own concerns. Kind of makes you wonder what the effort was. I'd love to hear the sales pitch. Maybe they just wanted to do it. That was kind of back in the era when someone with a dream and some money and some balls could just, do things. Yeah, it cost quite a bit of money, but you could set things up. I just thought it was an interesting gun and wanted to show it to you. The Junior really just has one safety, the manual safety, whereas these all have two. These, of course, have a grip safety plus a manual. And the CZ, at first, you might just think it has really no safety. But one of its is the fact that it's essentially a double action only. And its other is a mag disconnect safety. So, yeah, and of course, the CZA was intended to be a little more economical to produce in a post-World War II economy, very much like the South African gun. And I would say the Czechs did it better for pretty obvious reasons. But I'm not here to dog on the Junior. It is definitely cool in its own right. Here it is, size comparison with the little bitty Walther. And this is a more apt comparison, both in terms of size and design. Like I said, this is on the barrel front and slide front about the size of a Browning, but it does have a slightly longer grip than a baby Browning would. Here's an odd little duck. We'll definitely do a video on it soon. And these are the ones we'll probably look out next time. In fact, when I was picking the collections up, these intrigue me the most. I'm a sucker for British. I also like HRA production stuff. But that's for next time. No, I just wanted to show you this. I'm not going to shoot it. You definitely couldn't get spare parts. It's not certainly factory. Again, metallurgy is questionable. You have to really wonder if just firing 25 could do damage, especially in the early production. What really went into it. And the grips, breaking grips on these. It's a curio piece. And there's a market for them. But what do you think? Does anyone else own a South African Junior? It's kind of an underwhelming gun until you know the story. And then it gets a lot more intriguing, in my opinion. But if that's not to your fancy, well, next time we'll go to the British Isles and talk about that. Either way, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, check out the link to Patreon. And again, really the only sources online, and they're good ones, are Forgotten Weapons and Unblinking Eye for these, as far as I can tell. Then again, it's a commercial pistol made in a startup factory in South Africa, only made for a few years, and just a few thousand ever made. So how much do you really expect the internet to focus on it, right? This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.